And today's article is about people's use of alcohol or opioids causes greater secondhand harm than marijuana consumption does, study finds. This is in Marijuana Moment. Ben Adlin is the journalist. A new study of thousands of people nationwide suggests that secondhand harm caused by marijuana use is far less prevalent than that of alcohol, with respondents reporting secondhand harm from drinking at nearly 6 times the rate they did for cannabis. Perceived harms from opioids and other drugs also outweighed those related to cannabis. Looking at responses from 7,799 people to the 2020 U.S. National Alcohol Survey, researchers found that more than a third, 34.2%, said they'd experienced secondhand harms related to alcohol use over the course of their lives. Just 5.5%, meanwhile, said they'd never experienced secondhand harms related to cannabis. As for other substances, 7.6% of people said they'd ever been harmed by others' use of opioids, while 8.3% reported ever experiencing harm from unspecified other drugs. When respondents were asked about just the past 12-month period, alcohol still caused the most secondhand harm, with 6.2% of people saying they'd been harmed by others' use. Next were other drugs, 2.2%, opioids, 2%, and then cannabis, 1.8%. Our estimates for secondhand drug harms were lower than anticipated, given the ongoing opioid overdose crisis and the trend toward recreational cannabis legalization, the authors from the Alcohol Research Group and RTI International wrote in the study, which was published in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs. They also noted that the experience of secondhand harms from substance use differed among groups of people. People who were female, white, and had a history of alcohol problems and were separated, divorced, or widowed reported significantly more secondhand harms. Those harms included family and marriage difficulties, traffic accidents, vandalism, physical harm, and financial difficulties. As for cannabis, a higher prevalence of secondhand harm was found among Black people, though authors note that harms may stem from punitive policies around cannabis rather than the drug itself. This may derive, at least in part, from systemic differences, they wrote. Black individuals are more likely than their white counterparts to face legal repercussions from cannabis use and to be randomly drug tested, resulting in financial harms, for example, paying legal fees after an arrest, losing a job, and family difficulties, for example, marital disputes and stress, having children taken away, that could negatively impact those around them. Notably, the analysis found that people who used alcohol themselves had marginally higher odds of reporting secondhand alcohol harms, which authors say could be because heavier drinkers are more frequently exposed to other heavy drinkers. In contrast, they continued, people who use cannabis frequently had significantly lower odds of reporting secondhand cannabis harm, which also is consistent with previous findings. Despite far more respondents reporting secondhand harm from alcohol than from cannabis or other drugs, however, authors repeatedly questioned the participants' responses could not be trusted. Regarding the finding that cannabis users reported lower secondhand cannabis harms, for example, they suggested it could be because cannabis use frequently co-occurs with both alcohol and opioids, and respondents may be more likely to attribute harms to alcohol or opioids than to cannabis. They also said the lower reported rates of harm from cannabis and other drugs may be due to the stigmatization of reporting harm from drug use or because of types of harm they cause. Both cannabis and opioids are less linked with violence than alcohol, authors wrote. As such, secondhand harms associated with these substances may be less discernible than those for alcohol. For example, more amenity harms like trash in the neighborhood or being bothered or scared by those under the influence versus physical harms, and therefore are not as easily recalled by respondents. Further, those impacted by secondhand harms from someone else's substance use may self-blame, especially if they also use substances, they added. This is potentially worsened in the context of opioids or other drugs, which are more stigmatized than alcohol. Authors say that new research is meant to broaden the understanding of drug-related harms by attempting to measure and explain harm not to drug users themselves, but to friends and family of people who use drugs. We often don't consider how alcohol and drug use affects people other than the person using them. Study lead Erica Rosen, a postdoctoral fellow at ARG, said in a press release. It's critical to understand how far these harms extend into the community so we can develop more effective policies and interventions to better support both the individual and those around them. Legalization advocates, meanwhile, say the study's findings affirm what past research has already shown. It's well established that cannabis public health effects are far less than those associated with the use of alcohol. Paul Armentano, a deputy director for NORML, said in a blog post about the new report, and most adults now acknowledge this reality. That's despite growing evidence that frequent marijuana use is now more common among Americans than regular alcohol use. A recent study found that more Americans now consume cannabis every day than drink alcohol on a daily basis. Since '92, it found that per capita rate of daily cannabis consumption in the country has increased nearly 15 times over. A multinational investment bank said in a report late last year that cannabis has become a formidable competitor to alcohol, projecting that nearly 20 million more people will regularly consume cannabis over the next 5 years as booze loses a couple million drinkers. It also says cannabis sales are estimated to reach $37 billion in 2027 in the U.S. as more state markets come online. Data from the Gallup survey published last August also found that Americans consider cannabis to be less harmful than alcohol, cigarettes, vapes, and other tobacco products. Another study out of Canada, where cannabis is federally legal, found that legalization was associated with a decline in beer sales, suggesting a substitution effect. Separate research published earlier this year found that the use of cannabis alone was not associated with higher risk of a car crash, while alcohol, whether used by itself or combined with cannabis, showed a clear correlation with the increased odds of collision. Marijuana Moment is made possible with support from our readers. I think that's the end. So what do you guys think?
Well, I mean, overall, I feel like this is good news overall. I mean, they're saying that that cannabis lowers the risk of opioid use, and am I correct on this, Jamie?
What it's saying is that the use of alcohol or opioids causes more harm to other people, secondhand people, so friends and family of the people using or abusing the alcohol or the opioids, than does cannabis. So
okay. So they're saying that because people you don't have like overdose deaths or things like that from cannabis that you do have with opioids, then therefore the harm that it causes immediate family members is reduced because of the fact. Is that basically a good summary?
I think that's an element of it. And okay. I'll use my personal experience. I have a dad who has been growing cannabis. I'm 55, so 57 years. Mm-hmm. He's got PTSD, did 2 tours in Vietnam, and he does not drink alcohol. But he has smoked cannabis my entire life, and he smokes cannabis every single day. And swear to God, in our house, if he comes out of the bedroom and he's got that look on his face, we're like, go have a safety meeting. Mm-hmm. My mom was addicted to alcohol, and she got sober when I was a junior in high school. Her drinking had far more negative impact on our family than my dad's cannabis use ever did. And that's the point. When my mom would get drunk, we were not safe in the car. Things just didn't get done, mm-hmm. or, she just didn't get her work done. My dad is more productive when he uses cannabis than he is without it. So I think that the secondhand harm that we experienced in our family with my mom using alcohol, just from personal experience, I can tell you, I would much rather be a parent using cannabis than a parent using alcohol raising children. It makes my dad more present. It makes him happy. He's not running around punching holes in the walls and, things like that. So I just think that that's what they're talking about. The domestic violence, the traffic, tickets, the impact of what happens if you get caught, the days in jail, all of that. I mean, I just think a lot of people, like my dad, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It'll be controversial, but I'm just going to tell you, I feel safer around my dad when he's high than when he's not.
I mean, I mean, at the same time, I mean, this just kind of goes along with a lot of the other studies that we've been covering the past couple of weeks, where it just commonly shows that, you know, cannabis use does not cause that type of irrational, sporadic behavior, that unpredictableness. Like, most people just want to chill, have a good time, enjoy themselves. It doesn't create those emotional initial knee-jerk reactions that people get when they're on alcohol and other substances.
Well, alcohol affects your nervous system, which is a completely different effect. You know, your inhibitions come down, your you know, your instincts, or not your instincts, but your reflexes get slower. And, you know, you hear people and they're drunk and they're like, you know, they can't form a thought. But
it is a performance enhancing drug for karaoke, though. Let's be clear.
Oh boy. Fair enough. If karaoke was a sport.
Karaoke is an extreme sport, and the way I do it, it's full contact. Do not make me break out the solo.
Please, yeah, we don't have time for that. That's a whole different.
What's your go-to karaoke?
Whole different show, Yarrow. We got to keep this train rolling.
It's probably some sort of melodic ballad from the Scorpions or something really almost as old as me. But you could appreciate them because they're German and amazing. I think this article is really interesting in so much as it continues to reinforce other articles, other information that we have had. It's a steady drumbeat of messaging in the same direction. Not one of these articles has been some groundbreaking game changer, but what we've seen is a steady, productive, progressive drumbeat of information that supports the same position. That's kind of how science sometimes works. And so there was no aha moment in this for me. It was, you're darn right. And we knew this. And some of us already felt this. And now we're getting more science to support what we sort of felt and believed. Thank you, Jamie, to your dad for his military service. And the example that you used about the way in which cannabis was incredibly helpful for him is probably more pronounced in somebody who has spent time in those types of incredibly inhospitable environments, and the way in which it has shaped their coping mechanisms afterwards. And it's interesting for us to compare through your lens that experience of being raised by two parents, one who was smoking a lot of cannabis and the other who was maybe drinking too many martinis, and the way as a child how that impacted you. That's very powerful first person I statements, and I'm grateful that you brought that to today's show.
All right.